Facebook is revealing how much bad content it removes. In a newly released internal report, the company discloses how it determines violations on the site and how it categorizes them, and how many accounts were actually shut down and what still needs to be improved. Amol Rajan is BBC News' media editor, and he joins me now from London to discuss this. So, Amol, what does this report really reveal about the recent content on Facebook?
Rena, I think this report shows us really for the first time the scale, the breadth and the depth of the problems that Facebook and its moderators have to encounter on a daily basis. It's really important to have a bit of context here. Earlier this year, or throughout the first half of 2018, Facebook has been buffeted by allegations that it's misused or allowed data from its users to go AWOL, to be leaked. There was a big story around Cambridge Analytica, a British data firm, capturing that data. And Facebook has been very much on the defensive. And in response, the company has said, because its mission is to be more open and to make the world more connected, it wanted to be a leader in transparency. 3 weeks ago, for the first time, it published its community standards, editorial guidelines, if you like, the criteria by which it allows stuff onto its platform. And today we got the inner workings, and the inner workings show that about 3.5 million posts were taken down or labelled flagged because they were violent. About 1.9 million posts were taken down because they were terror related, and nearly 22 million posts were taken down or flagged because they had sexual content or adult nudity. So I think we've got a real sense for the first time of the horror, frankly, that Facebook has to deal with on a daily basis.
Well, it's hard to ignore also the fake accounts that were out there as well. What are they doing about that?
Well, Facebook have taken down around 583 million fake accounts. One of the interesting things about the report that we've come across today is that there's clearly a very important distinction between the areas, whether it's fake accounts or spam or terror-related content, where Facebook's algorithms and artificial intelligence are doing a good and pretty effective job of finding the stuff and stopping it being in use. So of those fake accounts, almost all of them were taken down minutes after being set up. So the technology is working really well there. Where it's not working so well is particularly around the issue of hate speech. Now, one of the issues here is that one person's hate speech is another's fair comment. So it's quite hard to work out what, in different jurisdictions and in different cultures, frankly, hate speech is. And there's not so much technological dependence, but human dependence. This is where Facebook's moderators are having to make these calls. So there is this distinction between the areas where the technology is working well and the areas where human judgment, what we used to call journalism and editorial selection, is coming into place. And it's really important to mention, Rena, that there are lots of areas where Facebook still hasn't released the information. For instance, around child exploitation, we still don't know how many problematic bits of content there are up there.
So, back to this, I'm so fascinated by the fact hate speech is just so hard for them to remove from a technological standpoint. So how do they have a plan on how they're going to go about doing that, or are they just going to give up on hate speech at this point?
Well, they just seem to be hiring more and more people. I mean, when I started out as the BBC's media editor a year and a half ago, I remember Mark Zuckerberg saying really clearly, we are not a media company. We don't want to do the stuff that you journalists do. You guys have to exercise human subjective judgments as to what is and isn't allowed into the public domain. And that's what journalists do. We don't want to do that. The fact is, over the past year, under tremendous pressure, under unprecedented scrutiny from legislators and regulators around the world, Facebook is hiring more and more and more journalists or moderators. These are people who have to look at a set of criteria, look at some horrible stuff and make a decision as to whether or not that stuff should be in the public domain, and that includes hate speech. And the fact is, in the area of hate speech, they're relying on human judgment more than they are on technology. So this does take Facebook into an area that it's very uncomfortable with. It does take it into the area of being more of a publisher than a platform. The truth, of course, is that it's both. But the fact is, it's hiring people, and that suggests it thinks human beings are needed to make a call about what is hate speech and what isn't.
Imagine that, human beings needed despite all this technology. I love hearing that.
Imagine, Rena.
Well, I do, though, want to ask you about the report talked about government requests for user data. How do you think that Facebook will handle that, especially from governments around the world? It's not just Britain or the US at this point.
I think it's such an important question because Mark Zuckerberg had resisted for a very long time testifying ahead of before Congress and Senate. It was obviously a very big deal when last month he spoke, and he was over 48 hours he was given something of a grilling. And there's a feeling that opened up the floodgates. So in Britain there's a very powerful committee of parliamentarians, what we call the Culture Media Select Committee, and they've demanded that Mark Zuckerberg appear before them, and he has so far resisted. Facebook instead sent a guy called Mike Schropfer, who's the chief technical officer. He was up in front of the committee quite soon. I think governments around the world believe that Facebook, because it has international impact and international reach and users, really ought to be available to all different legislatures. But the trouble from Facebook's point of view is that if Zuckerberg went to Britain, for instance, to testify, where does that end? It's a slippery slope, and it could end up in a situation where people in Romania and in Indonesia are asking him to testify. So my sense is that the company wants to be open, it wants to be pretty transparent, and it wants to show leadership, but it's not going to send Zuckerberg, the top dog, unless it's America, unless it's Washington and Capitol Hill.
Amol Rajan, pleasure to have you on. Thank you for joining us.